Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Chancellor's Installation Day lecture. My name is James Potts, and I'm currently a second-year politics student, as well as being the current Vice Chair of the Students' Union Council. The man in front of me is our new Chancellor, Sir Andrew Witty, who is the current CEO of GlaxoSmithKline. However, it's important to note that even with such a successful career, he started out as a student here at this university. Indeed, Andrew has always had an association with the university. He studied economics here and graduated in 1985. During his first year, he was a JCR president for the then Wortley Hall. Also during his time here, he was the chair of the Students' Union Council, and I'm sure he'll touch on his experiences during his lecture. Since then, Andrew started working for GlaxoSmithKline upon his graduation, and in that same year, and since then has held a variety of sales and marketing roles in the UK and abroad, including working in the company's International New Products Group, both in the respiratory and HIV infectious disease fields. Outside of the UK, Andrew has worked in South Africa, the USA, and Singapore, where he led the group's operations as Senior Vice President for the Asia-Pacific region. While in Singapore, he was a board member of the Singapore Economic Development Board and the Singapore Land Authority. And in 2003, he was awarded the Public Service Medal by the Government of Singapore, and in August 2012, he was awarded the Public Service Star. In 2003, he was appointed the President of GSK Europe and joined GSK's corporate executive team. And in May 2008, he was made Chief Executive Officer. He has served in numerous advisory roles to governments around the world, including South Africa, Singapore, Jiangsu in China, and the UK, where he is currently a member of the Prime Minister's Business Advisory Group, and is the lead non-executive director for the Department of Business, Innovation and Skills. Sir Andrew is president of the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, a position he took up in 2010. He was awarded a knighthood for services to the economy and the UK pharmaceutical industry in the 2012 New Year's Honours List. And in October 2012, it was announced that he had been appointed the 7th Chancellor of the University of Nottingham. And so, without any further ado, may I introduce the new Chancellor of the University of Nottingham, Sir Andrew Witty.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, James. Thank you very much for the introduction. It's really a great pleasure for me to have the chance to come and address you this afternoon. It's been a busy morning for me this morning so far. I've learned how to doff my hat, learned how to make quick changes from one robe to another, and to learn a bit of protocol on the way. So it's been an interesting, very different kind of morning for me, very different from running a global pharmaceutical business, but it's been a tremendous pleasure and a great privilege to have the opportunity to come and be formally installed as the new Chancellor of the University. Now, you've seen the title of this lecture, or this talk. I think lecture is massively overstating what I'm about to do. But the title of this talk is deliberately set as one of those typical essay titles you get when you're at university. Is it this or is it that? Is it about the degree or is it about the experience? And just like all of those paradox-led essay questions that you get, the answer is both. So that's the answer, and I'll spend the next half an hour or so maybe talking about why I think it's true that it should be both. It should be about trying to get a great degree, and it, of course, should be about trying to have a great experience. I'll talk a little bit from my perspective of being a student here. It was a long time ago now. It's a long time ago when the building you actually came to live in doesn't really exist as a hall anymore. That tells you when things have really moved on a long way. It is a long time ago. Much has changed. The university is massively bigger now than when I was here. I think there are now something like 5 times more students here at Nottingham than there were when I was a student. There are now 2 campuses, not 1 campus, and there's been many, many changes. But I think the culture of the place remains very much the same. The spirit, the legacy, and the high standard remain the same. And the university remains one of the strongest universities in the UK and clearly one of the top 100 universities worldwide, a very important institution in its own right, and it's a great place to be a student. I hope that those of you who are in the first year, those of you who are still in academic studies, and those of you who are teachers here, all recognize it for what it is. It's a great place to be. It's a place where you're spoiled geographically, you're spoiled from the campus perspective. It's a beautiful place to be. It's a great atmosphere to learn in. It's a great atmosphere to build connections, and it's somewhere where you can emotionally connect. It's different from being in a city-bound university where the halls aren't integrated together on a campus, and it has something special when you look at the Trent building and the lakes, and it's a view, a vista, if you will, that you'll remember long after you've stopped working here or stopped studying here. And it's great from that perspective. What's also tremendous about university, and I'm talking particularly to the people who are students here, is obviously you've learned by now, it's that first moment when nobody gets to tell you what to do. It's that first moment where you get to be free. And you get to be free in terms of how you spend your time, you get to be free in terms of the choices you make, you get to be free in terms of how you prioritize your life. Occasionally that's happened before you arrive, but it doesn't really happen very much. Parents are there telling you how to do things. There's always some kind of counter pressure in your life. For the first time, you've got that freedom. The question is what you do with it. So the freedom's terrific, but it's also that first time you have to take complete responsibility for yourself, complete responsibility for how you set your own agenda, how you do split the time between academic and non-academic experience building. And that's something which not everybody does well. Some people come along to university and they take too long to really realize the opportunity that they have been given. Could I get a glass of water, please? Excuse me. They take too long to learn that experience and to realize the opportunity they have. And I think it's a particular challenge at the moment in terms of the way in which technologies potentially make that ability to connect more difficult. If you think about when I was here, the whole of the hall, thank you very much, thanks. I'm walking proof that the drug industry still has lots to do in curing the cold, I'm afraid. So I apologize for this voice. But as I was saying, the challenges which I think exist for people arriving at university are a little tougher today than they were. Why? Because of things like social media, internet, and the ease with which we can communicate. Well, that sounds very contradictory, right? How can all that easy communication make it more difficult for you to connect at university? It's because it doesn't naturally make it easy for you to connect as groups. So if I think back when I was here, we came along, the only place you could really socialize was in front of the hall TV, or the hall snooker table, or the hall bar. Today, most of you have probably got TVs in your room. If you don't have TVs in your room, you can watch what you want to watch on the iPad. And if you don't like TV, you're probably tweeting or keeking to somebody else. You can self-propel a lot of your social life without having to get together as a group. That's a great missed opportunity. And it's important that when you first come into a university, we try our best to get as many as possible of new students to spend time together so they can immediately start to sense the diversity of what they've joined. If you're not in the group, it's very hard to appreciate the strength of the group. So the key, and I think one of the most valuable aspects of a university, is that creation of a social network, an ability to interact with other groups. And in some ways, there's a risk that there are certain parts of our society who are going to find that more difficult to do now than they did in the past. And that's a shame, because it's a missed opportunity. And no matter how much technology we've got in the world, no matter how easy it is for us to communicate via a machine, if we're not able to communicate in social groups, you will miss a lot in later life. So really having that chance to build social networks is critical. Making the most of that, prioritizing it. How to do that? Obviously, just sign up for everything you can sign up for. Build diversity of experience. Find ways to challenge yourself. Do things you've never tried before. All those things that many of you have already learned. That's really how to build the experience off the degree. On the degree, you want to come out with the best score you can get. And it doesn't really matter what anybody else tells you. When you get into the world, and unless you are going to be Mark Zuckerberg or Bill Gates, which some of you might be, most of you aren't, if you are not one of those people, then you need a good degree from a good university to get off to a great start. And however you dress it up, and however people try and make it sound anything other than that, that's important. You need a good degree from a good university to get going. So really, you're here, you've got half of that equation in terms of being at a good university. Now you have to get a good degree. So now it's all about managing that agenda. How do I get maximum diversity of experience and deliver a great result in my degree? How do I get the best result I can get in my degree and do all those other things? And guess what? Welcome to the world of and. Your whole life becomes and, not or, which is why the answer to the paradox is obviously both. You have to be able to achieve lots of things at the same time. When you're in business, you have to be a sharp, aggressive, ruthless decision maker, and you have to be able to build loyalty and inspire organizations of people. At university, you have to be able to deliver a great degree if you really want to set your future in a good place. And you ought to take the advantage to experience all of those new things that you have the chance to do here at the university. It's all about managing that. So the real skill that you're learning is how to manage pressure, how to titrate your time, how to mix your agenda, and how to know when to put the acceleration on one side of your life and then to back off and put the brake on as you accelerate on a different side of your life. That's the real life skill that you're developing. Now, as you come out of the university, the opportunities are absolutely immense. Now, we happen to be living in a period which I think is extremely confusing for everybody. And it's confusing for all sorts of reasons, but not least because we're all living in real-time news flow. You think about it for a second. We look at TV, we look at the websites, we look at the news feeds, and we know within nanoseconds when something's happened. And we get bored very quickly once we've heard about that news story for a day or two, maybe even an hour or two. Some of you may have seen on TV last night a 2-year visit back to, a 1-year visit back to the earthquake and nuclear accident in northern Japan. I don't know how many of you saw any news about that event in the last 10 months. Almost none, right? Syria. We know that there is a massive civil war going on in Syria, but actually you only hear about it every kind of 4 or 6 weeks because the news gets bored of it and they move off it and they go on to something else. But the world carries on. Those events carry on. But we're exposed to it in very managed segments, very managed sectors. You think about the global economy. We're in a global recession. We've been through global traumas economically. But in a sense, there is an expectation that these cycles will fix themselves over the period of a week, a month, or a year, when in fact we're probably living through enormously long, multi-year cycles. The news somehow skews our view of the world. It gives us a sense of short-termism. It gives us a focus, which isn't necessarily truly the focus of what's going on. When you look through the news a little bit, what you can see are some absolutely fundamental tectonic shifts in the way in which the world is operating. We're living in an era which I would argue 50 or 60 years from now, you'll truly be able to see what was going on because you will no longer be distracted by the news prioritization that we're all exposed to. And you'll see the real trends of what's going on. And for me, there are really 2 trends which are absolutely pivotal. One is a complete reordering of globalization, a shift from a hierarchy of powerful economies that have really dominated global growth and the global agenda for the last 150 years or so, as we see a shift in power from the northern hemisphere to the southern hemisphere and to the eastern hemisphere. And as we see a shift in favor of where population growth is coming from versus from where the aging populations are. And secondly, we're seeing the beginnings of enormous technological displacement going on. And those 2 things are being driven at very different paces around the world, but they are beginning to become obviously major trends. So if you just touch on those 2 as 2 examples, or 2 themes to just think about for a second. If you think about where we sit in Britain, in Nottingham, in Europe, and you can see the trauma that Europe is going through as it faces the reality of an unaffordable demographic curve combined with an unaffordable social promise. Collapse in productivity, collapse in confidence that Europe can sustain all of the promises that have been made. Contrast that with almost everywhere else in the world. 80% of the world economy is growing right now. I mean, you wouldn't think so when you think about what news you hear and read in the UK. 80% of the world economy is growing. All of those economies in Asia, in Latina, in Africa, they're all booming. They may sometimes grow at 7%, not 8%, but I think you'll find anybody in Whitehall who was offered a 7% growth rate would rip your arm off. These are remarkable growth rates. Why are they growing so strongly? Because they've begun to develop trade routes, relationships, bilateral trading capacities, which actually are beginning to unhook themselves from Europe. You're beginning to see the evolution of a very different type of trading world, dominated by China and India, dominated by Brazil, dominated by resource shifts across the world, all of which are building very significant new industries around the world. The world's third biggest aircraft manufacturer in the world, Brazil. Third biggest car manufacturer in the world, Brazil. China, world's biggest consumer of resources. These are the engines that are really driving the future of the world economy. You're seeing that reflected in the shifts in the way in which the G20 has begun to usurp the G8. You see that in the way in which the attitude, the stance of how emerging economies or fast-growing economies have started to take fewer and fewer lectures from the old economies of America and Europe. That's a huge shift, and it's not a trend that's going to stop. Because when you look at when you look at the underlying driver of those trends, it's demographics. It's demographics and the consequences of managing an aging population. One side has that challenge, one side doesn't have that challenge. And that is going to be what drives the changes. Think about then technology for a second. We've already seen in the last 15 or 20 years the initial explosion of electronics. Very much in the consumer space, but think about how that's been leveraged in industry and elsewhere. Later on this afternoon, I'm going to have the privilege of opening a building, get to put my name on a plaque, opening a new building in additive manufacture, 3D printing. Nottingham is a leader in this technology. But at my company, we already have this technology deployed in our factories. What does it do? It means that when a component breaks on a machine, we can print a new component there and then. We don't have to go to the stores. We don't have to ring up a supplier. We don't have to wait a week for it to be delivered. We don't have to have 100 of them in storage. We just hit the button and the computer prints a new component. It takes 20 minutes. You take the component out of the machine, you stick it into your manufacturing unit, and the machine's up and running again. Unimaginable. It's like science fiction, right? You go to our market research organizations, and we have this great product called Sensodyne, the world's best-selling toothpaste for sensitive teeth. It's a great product. You go and talk to consumers, and we say things like, how would you like this to be improved? And our consumer says, well, we'd love it to be in a slightly different pack. Or would it be easier if we could do this and this with it? And we say, well, could you draw that for us? So they draw it, or you ask somebody to draw it from their description. And we put the drawing in the machine, and the machine makes what they drew in front of them. And you just take out the machine, and they can play with it. And so immediately you can give consumers a complete experience of what it is they're trying to explain. And that, of course, makes it easy for our technicians to then make what they've described. That's the kind of technological change that's coming. Think about in my industry, we manufacture drugs. But what are drugs? Drugs are really chemicals. And for any of you who are in the chemistry units, pharmacy units, you'll know exactly what we do. We take raw materials of chemicals, we combine them together, we apply some heat, some pressure sometimes, take time to wait, a bit like a kitchen, and gradually those different ingredients turn themselves into drugs. It's a complicated, expensive, highly resource-consuming process. Very often it can take years. So for my biggest selling product, it takes us 4 years from the day the first raw material arrives to the day the finished pack leaves the factory. 4 years of chemical reactions. We have a product which is used for patients who need their blood to be thinned to prevent heart attacks, which takes 50 different chemical stages to make. Do you imagine that? 50 different stages of manufacture before you've got the finished product. To do that, you use enormous amounts of solvents. Most of these drugs are made in Singapore, and if you go to Singapore, if any of you have ever been there, and you look offshore at night, you'll see lots of lights in the sea, and those are lights on tankers. One of those tankers is full of solvent waste from one of my factories, because we pump it all onto that ship, which then sails to Germany, where the Germans are experts in solvent recovery and destruction. Not very green, right? To produce all of this solvent waste, to have it shipped across the world for somebody to destroy. Think about how complex that is, how expensive that is. One of the side effects of the electronic technological revolution has been a collapse in the cost of computer processing power. You're all familiar with Moore's law. Cost of processing halves every few years at an accelerating rate. That has had a consequential effect on everything you do with processing power. So our ability to sequence genes has massively exploded. We can sequence genes not for thousands of dollars per gene, but for literally pennies per gene. Now you all think as soon as I say genes, you think, oh my God, he's going to start manipulating my genes and this drug company is going to come up with some weird scheme to do something to us. No, what we're doing is we're manipulating enzymatic genes. Genes of enzymes. Why? Because we can program genes, we can program enzymes to essentially make drugs. So instead of taking those raw materials plus solvents plus heat plus time equals reaction, we can take the start material, apply an enzyme that we've programmed, and the enzyme biologically will turn the raw material into the drug. You essentially program the equation into the enzyme. You can take a 10-stage chemical reaction process into one enzyme. Consequence of that, 80% less solvent, 30% less carbon footprint, 50% less cost, 90% less inventory. The factory to produce the first old-fashioned version, 900 square meters. The factory to produce the new version, 90 square meters. Give you a sense of how that drives the economics of a business. It's remarkable. 50% of the equations, reactions that our company does are amenable to this technology. Imagine the impact that could have. So 2 big trends going on in the world. And I've just given you 2 or 3 very specific, small, close-to-home examples of the technology trends. We're living in an era where industrial behaviors, which people basically designed in the 20s and 30s, and then have optimized over the last 50 or 60 years, are now being potentially massively dislocated. Telecommunications, pharmaceuticals, chemical processing, the way oil is fractionated similarly, all of these sorts of things, the way products are being redesigned, the way sugar molecules are being changed so that it tastes of sugar, but you can never absorb the sugar. That salt molecules are being changed so that it tastes of salt, but it has no salt in it. Those sorts of technological changes are coming now super fast, at the same time as the powers of the world are changing. What does all that mean? It means there's never been a more exciting time to come out into the world. Certainly not for 100 years. This is not an era where you're going to emerge from university and come into a world which says we're on maintenance mode. We're on the let's not do anything too much in case we break it mode. You're going to come out into a world which is on everything is changing, we need to keep ahead of this race mode. It's a very interesting era. It couldn't be more different from the 70s and 80s, and it's very real across the world. The degree of competition is extraordinary. Geographic competition, technological competition, startups versus big companies, remarkable. And it's because of these massive global tectonic shifts which are going on. So the opportunity you've got is extraordinary. And it doesn't really matter whether you want to be a scientist or you want to be a journalist. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't matter whether you want to be an engineer or a politician, because all of those different careers and vocations are going to have a role to play in this kind of environment that I've just described. Because what we're really engaged in is a resetting of the way in which the world is going to operate. Now, it's not going to happen in a week, and frustratingly enough for CNBC and CNN, it's not going to happen before the end of the show. It's going to take a while. But the momentum behind it is enormous, and over your careers, in your generation, I would predict you're going to see a huge step change in the way this world operates. Now, how do you then get yourself in a position of great influence and success here? And I reflect a little bit on what I look for when I hire people, and I think I'm not very different from lots of other people who are senior in business or in any other field. What we look for is extremely smart people who can apply their smartness and who can get on with other people. Because again, unless you are that one individual who is going to sit in your bedroom and invent some amazing new product, then you're going to need other people to be successful. You're going to need naked intelligence, but you're going to need to know how to apply it. And if you can't do that, if you're deficient in one of those three areas, then you better had be Mark Zuckerberg, and you better had be capable of being totally self-propelled in your inventive success. Because otherwise you're going to really struggle. And again, it doesn't matter whether you're a scientist or a politician. If you don't have, I've never met a politician who succeeded by upsetting every single person they ever met. Politicians succeed by only upsetting 49% of the electorate. So it's really, whatever life you're in, the same rule applies. Your smarts, your ability to apply, and your ability to get on. So sometimes when you interview people, you find people who are straight A students, off the scale, brilliant, but have got no social interaction skills, have got no capacity to engage, are not interesting, have no conversation beyond what they did in their essays or their classes, have no view of the world, have no vision, have no capacity to really go beyond the hardcore academic focus that they've got. And then on the other side, you find the people who are all social but have got no kind of smart edge. They've got no content inside that social shell. What you want is both. And the university period that you're living in is the perfect moment to assemble it. The perfect moment to assemble it and to think about how you're going to then use it. How you're going to build those components of your offer, your contribution to society, what you are, what your balances are of smartness through to social interaction. And then think about how you're going to use it. And how you're going to use that to be different, how you're going to use that to make a mark, and how you're going to use the time you've invested and the money that's been invested in you by your parents or by your government or whoever has funded your attendance, or by yourself if you're working your way through school. How are you going to use all of that energy, that investment, to really make a difference in a world which I think you should anticipate as being extraordinarily exciting? A bit scary, a bit changey, but actually very exciting. Because in change, there is always a place for high performers. And the high performer needs to be somebody who can assess, interrogate, conclude, recommend, act, and get delivery. And that requires intellect, ability to apply it, and an ability to connect and to leverage other people. So that's why, for me, this is a great period of your life. It's a great period because it gives you that chance to assemble what you're going to ultimately be able to offer. It's why the paradox is obviously not a paradox, and it's obviously both. And it's a great moment for you to get into the practice of having to balance lots of competing pressures at the same time. Because this won't be the only time in your life when you think to yourself, I don't have time to do that thing, but I really want to. The trick is to figuring out how to create that time in your life so that you can say yes to both. There'll be plenty more occasions when you're being asked to do things and you really want to do it and you say, I just can't figure out how to do both. Great success will come to you when you do figure out how to do both. This is a great chance to learn that habit, that instinct, and to practice it a little bit. And when you come out, you'll be confident. Because when you add confidence, not arrogance, but when you add confidence to that mix that I've just described, there's a little bit of magic dust, and those are the people who always stand out, and those are the people who always get picked first. They're the people who are given opportunities, and they are the people who other people, people like me, bet on, and they get the opportunity to really make the weather and to really set the agenda and to be a shaper of the environment in which they're in. So I hope that's given you a little bit of a kind of food for thought. I'd love to answer any questions that any of you might have on this subject or any of the other subjects. I'm not sure I could give you a massive précis on what it's like to be a Chancellor yet, but if you're interested in any of the finer details of what's in those robes, I could obviously give you a clue on that. But listen, thank you for your attention, and now maybe open it up for questions.
Thank you, Andrew, for that. Can you, basically, if you have questions, feel free, just please wait for a microphone, which will be coming around to you at some point before you start asking your questions, so it can be recorded. Thank you.
I have a chap in the middle there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks very much for coming today. You touched a bit briefly on Moore's Law and the ever decreasing cost of gene sequencing now, and that really puts personal genomics into clinical care now in hospitals and in the home, like 23andMe does. What's GSK's view on personalised genomics, and how do you see that being part of your business portfolio as you move forward?
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. We are moving closer and closer to a world where we will have a lot more of that. I think we're reasonably far away, but not eons away, from having it on a, let's call it industrial scale, i.e. lots and lots of things. What you're going to see, first of all, I think, is you'll see things like very much more rapid gene profiling of certain types of diseases. So I can tell you right now, we have a series of programs at GSK where we're looking at patients who have lung cancer or melanoma tumors. We're resecting those tumors surgically. We then have a vaccine to vaccinate against a particular antigen that expresses inside those tumors, with the goal of obviously delaying or preventing a recurrence. So if we can turn the immune system on to essentially recognize a cancer and stop it coming back, it'll be very, very successful. What's very special about that is that it's not host dedicated, it's tumor dedicated. And one of the dilemmas of trying to do things around the human host is there's so much genetic variability in terms of how specific diseases express themselves and the environmental pressure that also can drive disease. So we focused initially on the tumors. What's fascinating is when you then start to say, okay, now let's look at all those patients who reacted well to this particular approach, you can start to build a gene profile, and then you can start to predict much more accurately who will get very, very high responses. So those people whose gene profile looks that way. And that, I think, is likely to be the most productive or the highest yield approach, at least initially. I think the more kind of ambitious view is going to take some more time, but it is potentially an achievable goal when we have enough processing power to make it happen, right? But I think this will come in a couple of big steps. We're going to get results back from this program towards the end of this year. And if it's successful, I think it on its own will take the whole science forward a very significant leap. And then it will be, okay, what does the next version look like? And one of the features of this technology era we're living in is the half-life between each major leap is shortening, right? So it's not taking 20 years to go from A to B to C. It's going at ever more rapid paces, which is all to do with processing capacity, more open innovation, more pressure on the solution being driven out. And so I think you'll see a lot of progress in this, but I don't think you should expect in 5 years we're all going to go give a sample and, you know, it won't all be solved quite that quickly or that simply, but I think big progress will definitely be delivered in the next 5 to 10 years.
Okay, that's great. Can we take you on the left here? Thank you.
Thank you. As someone just about to leave university with ambition and a desire to make my mark on the world, it saddens me that increasingly it seems that success in this country at least is begrudged or at worst vilified. What do you think needs to change to reverse that trend?
Well, yeah, it's a good question. You know, it's not just this country. First of all, it's not just this country, and it's not just a UK issue that sometimes success can be characterised as a bad thing or can be made to look that way, and you don't have to go much further than Paris to see what, you know, is really grim there. So, I mean, Paris is nice, but the whole anti-success thing is quite a big deal. And anybody here from Australia, you'll all be familiar with the tall poppy syndrome. You know, once a poppy grows tall, you chop the head off. It's pretty much how they treat success in Australia. So I think some of it's natural. But two things I would say, actually. You're not going to change the world in that way, because you know what? The majority of people aren't ultimately going to be as successful as you hope you will be. So you are inevitably going to generate some of that kind of human competitive envy type response. Don't worry about it. Key lesson is resilience. You have to develop resilience, and you have to develop some thick skin, and you have to be able to cope with it, because trust me, there'll be a lot worse thrown at you than, you know, people just saying, oh, you know, is that person getting paid too much, or why are we allowing that person to do this? There's a resilience challenge, which is all part of building experience and acquiring that experience, right, is really important. The second part is to always think about what you're doing with your power, right? So what you're really describing is, I want to be powerful. And so, you know, as you acquire power, and whether you're a journalist and you can cast the minds of millions of people with what you write, whether you're a politician where you have absolute power, or whether you're an industrialist where you clearly have power through your industrial operation, the real question is, how are you going to use that power? So is it just about money, or is it about trying to create a positive impact in society? How do you balance those needs? Because you're in a position where you get to set that agenda. Well, lots of people say, well, we're under all this pressure from shareholders to do this. Well, you should argue back. Say, no, we can do something for shareholders, and we're going to do this for the people in Africa who are dying. Or we're going to do this for opening access to neglected tropical disease. And so it's around how you choose to use that moment. Some of that might ameliorate the criticism that you're going to get, but it won't all go away. And then you have to use your resilience. So it's a lot about how you build your own strength, and it's partly about how you choose to use the influence that you've acquired for society and not just for yourself. And I think that that's the best advice I can give you, because the world's not that dimension of the world. Human nature isn't going to change.
Okay, can we have the lady there in pink? Wait for the side. Yeah, great.
Hi, you mentioned like you emphasize the importance of both social and also the academic side. Do you know, like some certain subjects it's highly like heavily academic, so students do not get a lot of group work. So therefore they encourage to like join societies, like, you know, like student unions to organize activities so that they can get some people's and social skills. But the problem with that is lots of students, they come out, like you mentioned, like very sociable, like great, but informal, but not professional. They don't get the professional kind of like communications and group work and teamwork that what's like required in a workplace. Is not just social, it's not going out and being talk to people, it's professional as well. So as a Chancellor, what do you think? Should subjects at certain degrees, they should provide more group work so students get kind of like professional communication skills and teamwork instead of just a sociable
Yeah.
person? And another question.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned the 3D. It's really cool. But
Yeah.
what about different materials and the interior as well? How does it print? Because I know the printer, it prints, but just ink, right?
Yeah, no, it's great. You should 4:30. You should come and see the machine we're going to do. But yeah, okay. Yeah, but different sorts of materials. So it doesn't necessarily have to be ink. It's just it's that you print it. So the use of the word print is just a descriptor, but you can use different materials. It's just your ability. If you think about how we make things normally, we either carve them, chip pieces off, or somehow fabricate it. This is literally de novo, right? So you start with nothing, and you start spraying material, layer, really like a bit like a dot matrix printer. So you start just spraying material layer after layer, and you gradually end up with the shape, right? So
different printers for different materials, say for example.
not necessarily. Not necessarily. But this isn't necessarily. I think actually, interestingly enough, I think you can actually buy one of these machines to have at home. You can actually have these domestically, but the kind of thing we use in the factories are not, it's not a huge thing. So, but that's what it does. To your first question, great question. So, social doesn't mean going out and getting absolutely drunk every night and being incoherent or whatever. That's not what I mean. I mean, there's a place for parties, but that's not what I mean. What I mean is the ability to have a breadth of mind beyond your hardcore academics, right? So beyond your real focus on the science. So what makes you interesting? Because actually, who do you engage with? Socially, you engage with people you're interested with, who have got interesting things to say, who have got a perspective on life. Sometimes you want to argue, sometimes you want to agree, but they have a perspective. How do they achieve that perspective? They achieve it by being broadly read, for example, by interacting with other people, by listening, by just developing those skills, developing debating skills, all of those sorts of things. I spent time, like James did, in the Students' Union. That was a great way for me to meet lots of people. I met all sorts of people. I didn't agree with a single thing that came out of their mouth. But it didn't matter, because I was learning how to interact with people who I didn't agree with in their content. Perfectly decent people. I just thought they were bonkers politically. And you just kind of learn how to deal with it. But in the real world, you're going to come across people like that all the time. And so whether it's through things like the union, charities, I think a great way, if you look at the way students can get engaged in charities, another great way to operate with people. And absolutely finding ways, even through tutorial groups, through study groups, they're all valuable. Now, and it doesn't matter that everybody does it a different way. The whole beauty of this is that university is about an individual journey. What is so scary sometimes is that I think people, and what I'm trying to communicate a bit today, is that people get so anxious about, I've got to get a job, this world is so competitive, that they then almost translate that to be, it's all about the degree. And actually the biggest turn-off when you interview is somebody who is a straight A degree student or a first degree student, but has got no ability to engage. Because you're just not going to hire that person. Now, they might go on to be the most brilliant individual entrepreneur, but not that likely. Not that many people succeed in that path. So I would just encourage the effort to try and find ways to build that bridge. And I think to the extent there are teachers in the audience, lecturers in the audience, I think it is there's an obligation from leadership of the university to also try and help create those opportunities. Thank you.
Okay, that's great. We have a lot of hands up. Can I take you here at the front? Just stay away from the microphone. Thank you.
Hello. I'm head of the University Counselling Service here. So actually, the message that you're emphasising, and just in that answer you've emphasised it again, is one that's very, very close to my heart. Because relationship difficulties are the third most common problem that would be presented to the University Counselling Service, which is a service to staff as well as students.
Right.
And I think the basic point that you're making, which is that although we might live in a world where tectonic plates are shifting and the world will go faster and faster, we are nevertheless all fellow members of the human race, and actually our capacity to make relationships with each other and to connect with each other are going to be still our kind of ground base that's always going to be really important for building a strong career for In what way has that played out in your own career, your own capacity to be able to make good relations?
That's a great question. So I think at the very basic level, again, a bit like a politician, you don't progress inside big organizations. I mean, I happen to have chosen to work in a very big organization. It's about how you build relationships and how you avoid fights is a very early skill. Because actually, you quite often you meet people at junior levels who are very sharp-elbowed and they don't last long. And even if they last a little while, they suddenly find the person who they were a little bit aggressive to turns out to be their next boss. You know, and things, and you know, guess what? It comes around. And so you learn at a very early phase in your junior career, there's no need. There's absolutely no need. You get higher quality results, decisions by working together, by having that strong relationship, collaborative relationship. And sometimes you win, and sometimes somebody else wins, but overall you all win, right? And you know, it just all balances out over time. So I think at a very literal level, you learn that very early in business. The second thing I would say is, as James mentioned in the introduction, you know, I've spent a lot of time working in a lot of different parts of the world with obviously my organizations, lots of other organizations, and governments. If you get posted to Singapore, and suddenly you get an invitation to go be the advisor to the governor of Guangzhou in southern China, you better be able to fly to China, get off the plane and click. Because if you go to China, get off the plane, and you are essentially dysfunctional in your ability to connect, then you can't do anything. And when you come back from Guangzhou and you get a phone call to say, can you go on the board of the Economic Development Agency of Singapore, which manages the investment of industry in Singapore, you better be able to go and connect with the Singaporeans. And when you come to London and you're asked to do something with the same thing. And so when you think about how you want to project your connection and develop your influence, to be blunt, you have to recognize that's built on an ability to create relationships. And ultimately, the more, whether you're in a team of 10 people, or you lead a big company and you're talking to prime ministers and all the rest of it, guess what? People talk about you. And gradually the reputation, you know, your reputation precedes you. And if your reputation is being a bit dysfunctional, aggressive and, you know, introverted, whatever, then that's one thing. If your reputation is broad thinker, gets on well with people, that's a different thing, and different doors are going to open and close according to those two scenarios. And that, I think, has very much been the sort of story of my career in terms of trying to manage that. Now, it's not always perfect. You make mistakes. Some days it just doesn't work out. You just can't make it connect. And those are the days you have to just go back and learn your lessons and figure out what went wrong. They're not the days to say it was always everybody else's fault. It's the day to say, what didn't I do well and how could I have done that better? Even if it was their fault, how could I have done that better? And, you know, that's the way to really deal with those setbacks, because otherwise you're never going to really grow. You're going to just stagnate a little bit.
Okay, that's great. We have only 4 minutes left, so I'm going to really struggle to get around people. Can we take you, sir, here in the front? That'd be great. Thank you.
Hi, I'm a student in Nottingham, and I know the next emerging paradigm is called like the human consciousness and like the genetics, like the both part of genetics. And I wonder if GSK or HGS or the University of Nottingham, how to adapt to the next paradigm, and how are the students like us? What advice would you give to like students like us to adapt that paradigm, because it's quite weird for us, like as well as the technological changes and everything. Yeah, I just wonder.
Well, so the first thing I would say, while I've laid out what I think are two pretty strong and active trends in terms of change, the exact expression of how change is going to happen is very unpredictable. And one of the great traps is we fall into believing that this particular pathway will be the only pathway which drives change. So actually remaining open-minded, thoughtful about the scenarios of how technologies might evolve is a key skill. Managing ambiguity, managing actually managing options. So anybody in here is an economist, go do your option theory analysis. And there's I once met Mel Scholes, who was the inventor of Black-Scholes option theory, is a Nobel Prize winner of economics. And he once said to me, the key to success, Andrew, is a brilliant quote from the inventor of options theory. The key to success, Andrew, is keep your options open. And I think actually that makes brilliant sense in a period of change. Because in a period of change, you can sense the macro tectonic tidal shift, but it's really hard to know exactly which bit of that is going to really happen first, or whether it's going to be a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right. So my strong advice to you is don't overcommit yourself to a theory too early. Keep your mind open, keep your options open, and as you think forward, start to narrow in as you get more information. So don't rush to make a decision. Don't rush to take a view. Be open to it, and the pathways will start to become clearer as time goes by. The counter watchword is time is going by more quickly in our era than in any previous era. So you've got to keep your eye on it, right? But it will become clearer.
Okay, we have time for... Sorry. We have time for one more quick question. Can I take you here on the front row, in the red?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh.
Sorry.
Thanks for your talk. I agree with you that communication is incredibly important and intelligence as well, but maybe you should prepare us for a bit of failure. How important is luck? And are there any steps to take which would mitigate the effect of, you might just be unlucky.
Yeah, you can always be unlucky.
How important is it, as you would say?
It's a great question. And, listen, there are obviously moments where there are circumstances completely out of your control. They're just, you just catch a bad break and things go wrong. There's not a lot you can do about that. I think, though, an awful lot of luck isn't really luck at all. It's an ability of an organization or an individual or a group of individuals to decode the pattern quicker and more efficiently than other people. So what looks like luck very often isn't luck. It's because they're very good at processing apparently contradictory, difficult signals, thinking about this. They'll be sat looking at option set. And of course you don't really think this way, but the way their minds work is they're thinking about option sets all the time. They're assessing all the data essentially against that pattern. Eventually they start to see the pattern before other people see it, and then they do something which creates the luck, right? So the expression of their action looks like luck. It's not really luck at all. There is such a thing as bad luck, where just bad things happen. And in those situations, it's back to the answer I gave at the beginning there about resilience. So the best advice I can give you about bad luck is when you get knocked down, stand up. It's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen, it'll happen to you somewhere, right? Somewhere in the system, something is going to go against you. It's going to be just bad luck, and you're going to have to say, right, got hit, learned a lesson there, look right before you cross the road, whatever the lesson is, and I'm going to get up and I'm going to try again in whatever way I'm going to try. But the bit around being lucky, I'm less of a subscriber to that. There clearly is an element of that. I think that's more to do with your ability to do some of the things I've been talking about today. Are you consciously eyes open? Are you always thinking? A word I love to describe a mindset of successful people is restless. Is your mind restless? Or is your mind somehow lazy, right? Or satiated, maybe a better word, right? Is your mind satiated? Is it kind of relaxed? Has it stopped looking? Or is it restless, and is it searching for new patterns? And the people who are restless, they find new patterns quicker than other people, and that's how they look lucky. Okay? All right.
That's great. I make it just gone past 4 o'clock, so I'm sorry for those people who had your hands up. We're going to have to leave it there. Thank you ever so much for coming, and may I wish you a very good afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, James. Well done.
Thank you.